I'm super excited to be here. It's my first time in Colombia. It's my first time in South America. It's a bittersweet day for me. First, it's like Leon said, it's my last dev talk that I'm ever giving, so better not blow it, right? At this exact moment in New Jersey, where I live, there's a memorial going on for a really good friend of mine. His name is Carl Bredlau. He was my mentor in college. He is the person who told me, get out of academia, work in industry, learn JavaScript, have fun. And one thing that he always stressed to me is that you should take something that you love and apply it to work. And if you can't do that, then you should move on to something else because you're just going to be miserable. And nobody likes it when you're miserable. When I was at work, working with him at the university, whenever I was miserable, I was horrible to be around. And he's like, nobody wants that. Stop being a brat. Do something fun. And so I was always really into making pixel art. And I was like, well, how can I apply that to my work? And so I drew pixel art. This is a portrait of my friend Wilman, who's here. And I created new ways of drawing pixel art, and then I was drawing pixel art in real life, a color pencil. And I created an application called Make 8-Bit Art at make8bitart.com, where you can draw your own pixel art in the browser. And it's this tool that I started writing a few years ago under the guidance of Carl Bredlau, where I learned JavaScript. And after I finished my master's in computer science, I went on to work at the National Basketball Association doing JavaScript and making art on the side. And it was cool. I was in an art installation in Ontario where kids were like making pixel art and they were smiling, and that was great. And that's something that I really also like to do, is getting children into technology and keeping them there, because that's another problem that we tend to ignore. And it's what's great about what I love about where I am from, which is what I love about this tech community here, learning about all of the meetups going on and this conference as well. I am one of the Borough JS, we call it, organizers. We have different meetups in New York and in New Jersey, where I'm at. If you see me, I have JSConf stickers. Some of y'all got some. And it's just like a really great group of us that just want to get people into JavaScript, staying in JavaScript, and having a fun time. These are all like musicians and comics and artists, and that's what's really great about programming, is that we can apply all these interdisciplinary areas into what we do at work, hopefully. That's what inspired this original portrait. He's wearing the same outfit as me today, so if you see him, you'll know. Anyway, the title of my talk is not TBD, as the site says. I'm just really I'm super into procrastinating. So I told Juan Pablo the title like 2 days ago. It's called Deconstructing the Pixel using JavaScript, because this is JSConf, but really actually other things, so it doesn't have to apply to JavaScript. My name is Jenn Schiffer. I'm Jenn Schiffer on Twitter. I work at a company called Boku, which is based in Boston, Massachusetts, which is north of where I live in New Jersey. And we do consulting, open web technology, so a lot of JavaScript. I've been writing a lot of PHP lately, which has been cool and challenging and weird and exciting. And we also do education and running conferences so that we can get people socializing and doing exactly this. And yeah, so Make 8-Bit Art is my passion project. We have 25% open source time at Boku, so a lot of us work on such projects. My coworker Rick Waldron works on Johnny 5, and we have people in the jQuery Foundation and just doing all sorts of cool stuff that a lot of you hopefully are using. Make 8-Bit Art became really interesting for me in learning JavaScript when it came to the undo redo function, because one of the best things about making art digitally is that you can easily erase and nobody will know. Unlike when you're drawing with pencil on paper and you erase the pencil and it doesn't go away, or the eraser is really crappy and actually makes things worse. You don't really have that problem digitally. So for example, this is Make 8-Bit Art here. Just the undo redo is just drawing. I'll draw a little smiley face. It's terrible. And just undoing or redoing. So when implementing this, I had to think, like, what am I going to do? How am I going to save all of these strokes so that when the person decides, oh, I made a mistake, I want to undo it, how do I revert back to that? And so I started saving each pixel, each square drawn, as an object. And then we had an array of objects. And the undo-redo function would say, well, if I'm undoing, then I'll go to the previous pixel. And the original color was red, so I'll just put a red pixel back in that spot. And it was simple enough. And it had me thinking, this is what I look like when I'm thinking. This kind of looks like something I could make into JSON, so it could be used outside with different languages and stuff. And for those of you who don't know what JSON is, it stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It's a lightweight data interchange format. You can learn more on JSON.org. And the great thing about it is that even though the JS stands for JavaScript, you don't only use JSON. You don't have to only use JSON in your JavaScript programming. I use it a lot in PHP. I use it a lot for getting data and connected to APIs and stuff. Who here has used JSON before? Cool. So I was like, I should explore this. That's a telescope for exploring JavaScript. What can I do with this collection of pixels? And so I was like, I should learn about arrays more. And one of my favorite things to do when I want to learn something is submitting a talk at a conference, saying I'm going to talk about it, so that a week before the conference, I'm like, oh man, I better learn this so I can write a talk and give it. So that's like what I did. But I knew about arrays because of my background in computer science, but I was taking advantage of all the great abstractions that JavaScript gives to us when it comes to arrays. So I spoke at TXJS, which is run by Mr. Alex Sexton, who is speaking today. And I talked about how I use arrays in Make 8-Bit Art. I talked specifically about the setInterval function. How many of you are familiar with setInterval? It's great. So for Make 8-Bit Art at TSJS, I demoed the ability to draw. And so then you have this array of objects you can undo or redo. But wouldn't it be cool to animate what you drew? And so I used setInterval to individually draw each pixel to animate how the drawing was made. Which is cool if you make it's like a time lapse of the art that you're creating. And people do that on YouTube and Vine all the time where they're drawing something and they'll do a really quick time lapse. Well, here you have one that's done digitally. And the code for that is pretty simple. Basically, I go through each item in my array, each pixel, and I set an interval. And I have a function called draw slowly. So my interval just says, every 60 milliseconds, call that function on the next item in the array. And that's how it slowly draws it as opposed to just immediately spitting it out on the browser, which is a really fun, interesting way to handle pixel art and not only make it just a static drawing, but something a little more dynamic. So a pixel deconstructed. We're going to talk about the states and behaviors of it. A pixel has an X and a Y position. If any of you have played with voxel before, or even with Minecraft, those are 3D pixels. You'd have a Z coordinate because it's three-dimensional. But I only deal with 2D stuff. A pixel also has a color and a size. We're not talking about display pixels. We're talking about the pixel size in the art. So by default, Make 8-Bit Art has a pixel size of 15 display pixels. I don't know, I think it looks nice, but you can change it in the app if you wanted to. There's also behaviors and methods that you can call on pixels. You can get those properties, or you can set those properties. And then you could do things like draw, like I did in that previous example. And so I was like, oh, wow. Like, basically, I think of pixel art as an object. How can I apply my background in object-oriented programming to something I love, pixel art? Which takes me back to Dr. Breadlow here, who's always on my mind. And I'm like, oh, this is exactly like what he was always talking about. So even years later, I'm like thinking of like the advice that he was giving me, which is what makes a great mentor. Mentors are really hard to find. And if you feel like you can be a mentor, then I really hope that you can be one, because we're all looking for one, no matter what age or what level of programming we're at. So I became an artist in residence at this place called the Made in NY Media Center. It's a place in Brooklyn, New York, that has initiatives for keeping people who make movies in New York instead of moving to Los Angeles, which is interesting. So now outside of the Boku office, they're always like filming movies. Like Juan Pablo and I like accidentally walked on the set of the next Ninja Turtles movie, and we might be extras in it, I think. So keep an eye out for that, or not. So at the Media Center, they had me an artist in residence up until the end of this month. And they're like, you have the space to basically do anything, and you can interact with all these documentarians and filmmakers and projectionists. And I wanted to immerse myself in pixel art and digital programming. And by immerse, I mean actually completely immerse myself in all of that, to the point that I took a 4-week sabbatical from work at Boku in order to build stuff to do that. I went back to studying RDFs, which are resource description frameworks. Back when I was in graduate school, I studied latent semantic indexing for the semantic web. The semantic web is like something that we cared about for like a couple of years until like apps came out. How many of you make movies or take photos? Okay, so you're probably familiar with the resource description framework called EXIF, Exchangeable Image Format. So when you're looking at your photos and your videos, you can see that there's data, metadata, attached to those files, like what camera was taken, what software on the camera exists, what software you're using to edit it, what the title, you can set all that sort of stuff. And that's not really something that when you're making like art in the browser that people think about, how to add that metadata. So I was thinking, well, there should be a way to attach this metadata to pixel art, like in Make 8-bit art or any other apps that involve it. And there's some relevant properties, like software, artist, image description, user comment, copyright, date, time that it was saved. There's a lot of redundant like date things in EXIF. It's a really interesting spec to read. But I sort of like narrowed it down to like these 6 ones. And then I was like, I can create another RDF for pixel art, and that is the pixel art image format. So I coined Pixif, which basically is like that array in Make 8-bit Art's undo redo. It's just a collection of all the pixels. So at the very most basic level, the X and Y position of the pixel, the color, and the size. And I also sometimes save the data URL of the canvas that you're drawing on in case you want that in the beginning and you don't want to redraw everything that's going on. But it's not really necessary. So together, these EXIF and PIXIF objects in JSON, I decided I would call it Pixon, pixel art object notation. So yeah, it's just JSON. Brendan Ike told me last night I should fork JSON. I told him I'm busy. So if you go to my site, jenmoney.biz/Pixon, I have a very basic initial abstract of it. I'm not going to read all of it, but it talks about the structure of the EXIF, what PIXIF is. It gives an empty example of JSON with no values. It gives an example. These are each pixels, and this is all for a very small drawing of a few pixels. It can get to a lot of data if you're drawing a full-on image, and all that sort of fun stuff. Pixon is exportable and importable on 2 apps that I know of so far because I made them, Make 8-Bit Art, and this site called August.today, which I created in August during my sabbatical. My goal was to make a projectable art piece that allowed people to interactively create pixel art with different inputs like iPads or the Kinect and stuff like that. And it's not quite finished, but for example, I'm going to import some Pixon that I created and animate it. And it'll just reanimate it over and over and over again. Yeah, and this is what I had exported from Make 8-Bit Art while Donovan was giving his talk. I was paying attention, Donovan. It's hard when you have to get up on stage in front of everyone in 10 minutes. And also, you can keep drawing on this piece, and the point was to have other people draw. And then it goes to the end of the array, erases, and then it starts all over again. And so hopefully at the media center or anywhere else, because it's so portable, it can go really anywhere, I don't have to be there, have a piece that everyone in the room can just start drawing this stuff. And it's a lot of fun because people like to make art and see instant gratification, especially on a large screen, which I think is why I like speaking at conferences. The other day, my friend Blake, who works at Mozilla in Toronto, he made a thing to export images in Acorn, which is an image app on the Mac. It's like a kind of like Photoshop or whatever, cheaper. And you can create plugins in JavaScript, which is pretty cool that you can take native apps and extend it with this language. And so yeah, so Acorn app, if you use that, you can export it in Pixon and do all sorts of stuff in other apps that you're making. I had created a bunch of code pens that takes Pixon and randomly changes all the color values so that you were creating glitch art out of your already existing pixel art. And you can do all sorts of things with it. You can easily increase the size of pixels by doing a find and replace. And you might think, well, why don't you just save the image as a PNG or something like that? My number one concern with creating Pixon was not making something that was efficient, because sometimes we should just chill, It was more so to create art with code, which I did with Make 8-Bit Art, but also to create code by drawing, which is what you're doing. You're drawing pixel art. Anybody can draw pixel art and then export JSON. And so I have this friend who is a pixel comic artist. He doesn't know how to use GitHub because he had an issue. And I was like, do you know GitHub, to see if he could post it? And he's like, I don't know what GitHub is. And sometimes we forget as developers that not everybody knows the tools that we're using. There's no reason for a comic book artist to care what GitHub is. So I had showed him this, and he's like, oh, wow, I created this code. What is this? What does this mean? I had him read my site about Pixon. And so now he has an understanding of objects, states, and behaviors. And he's making art, and he's seeing how changing the colors changes the color codes in Pixon. And he's manually changing sizes and stuff, and he's basically programming and making art at the same time, which is really cool, because I want artists and developers and people who are both to collaborate and make cool stuff, because that's what's going to attract cool people into our industry and keep them there. And that's pretty great. So one thing that you can do, that's you all snowboarding. I can find an emoji pointing forward. The 2D space is hard. You can go to jenmaya.biz/Pixon, read about Pixon. You can contribute. Almost everything I do outside of work is open source, so you can even change, do a PR that changes my site to have your name on it. I'm not going to accept it, but the ability to make a PR is pretty cool. I'm Jenn Schiffer on GitHub, so you can see all the apps that I've made for it, and hopefully add your own or contribute. I'm Jenn Schiffer on Twitter, so let me know if you make pixel art or use any of the apps or make your own, so I can add them to the list of apps that use it. And if you're not comfortable with reaching out publicly, my email is jen@.biz.info, and I'm a serial email checker, not always quick responder, so you can just get me there. And thank you very much. This has been so great. Again, this is like a hard day for me, but all of you have been so nice. It's been really awesome, like taking selfies with y'all and like talking about where I'm from. And I'm really happy to be here. And I wish I could stay longer. So I'm definitely gonna have to like come back and maybe make Juan pay for it. But thank you very much.